So happy Friday raining morning in the Northwest. I'm not an actor, I fix shit, so I'll do the best I can here. What we have is a 2006 F350. It's a farm truck. I think it's been about 2 years ago, I put a long block in this thing, along with customer supplied all manner of aftermarket bullshit. Some of it I'm okay with it. Some of it is kind of stupid, but anyway. So what we have going on here is we've got a extended crank after an overnight soak. So first thing I did before I even checked the codes, because I already assumed what codes I would have, is I air tested the system, turned the IPR on to 100% or so, and put air in there, listened with a stethoscope down the oil fill tube there, and didn't hear any air leaking. So I don't have an air leak in the high pressure oil system. So the other thing that I needed to look at, and I did before I even got started, is I pulled the oil filter out and it was empty. It had drained down overnight. So there's a couple of things that can do that. One is we've got a filter drain in there. It's a little plastic piece of shit that, when you pull the filter out, it opens up and it drains directly into the crankcase, so that when you change the filter, you can change that oil and filter housing too, because it'll drain down into the crankcase. The other thing is we have an anti-drain back valve in there, which is this right here in the bottom of the filter housing. Sometimes this rubber gets eat up and it'll actually leak, and then the oil will leak out of there. The way this oil system works is we've got an oil pump, G-rotor pump, driven off the crankshaft. It pulls oil out of the crankcase, pushes it directly up into the oil cooler. The cooler has a bypass on it too. I guess they thought if the oil cooler, the oil portion of the plates got plugged, it would bypass it. So, but anyway, I don't ever see that happen. It's always the coolant part that gets plugged up. But I'm not an engineer, so anyway, oil pump or oil pan goes to the oil pump, goes directly to the oil cooler, through the oil cooler to the filter, comes out of the filter. It's going to go right to the turbo because it feeds right off the oil cooler, your turbo feed, and then it's going to go, next thing it's going to hit is the high pressure oil pump reservoir, which the oil cooler sits into. It holds about almost a quart of oil in there around that oil cooler, and so that's under pressure, so keep that in mind for a minute here. And that feeds the high pressure oil pump, and then it goes on and it hits the oil galleries that feed the lifters, the piston cooling jets under the pistons, goes over, hits the cam bearings, goes through the cam bearings down to the main bearings. From the main bearings, the crankshaft is cross drilled, it goes to the rod bearings, and then at that point it's done. So there's a lot of hungry mouths to feed on the oil circuit on these things. So you need one hell of a pump that moves one hell of a lot of oil. So anyway, back to our problem here. I told you what can cause that filter to drain, but most likely what's going on this thing is my high pressure oil pump is leaking. When it sits overnight, it'll draw that oil down in the reservoir and draw the filter down too. So when you get in to start it, it's not going to build oil pressure till you get base engine oil pressure built back up. And if you have to fill your oil filter housing and partially or maybe totally fill that high pressure oil pump reservoir, it's going to take a little bit of cranking. So the only codes this thing had were I think the EGR cooler's missing on this thing, so it had a couple EGR codes, which we don't care about. The other one is it set a injection control pressure circuit code, so, and it didn't set a ICP low while cranking. Generally that code only sets when the engine's hot and it won't start, and I'm not sure why that is, but that's the only time I ever see that code. The reason it sets this code is because the pump still is moving something in there, and you'll get slight oscillations on the injection control pressure sensor, and changing the capacitance on it. And the PCM interprets that as a circuit code, so I'm going to ignore that one because I had cam and crank sync pretty rapidly when I was cranking it. So that's kind of a ghost code, they call it. So anyway, I'm going to go after the high pressure oil pump, and the way that after discussing it with other people in the industry, you know, for so many years, the way that I'm going to go after that is I'll have to pull the oil cooler out and you know, fill it up or leave the oil in there and see what happens overnight. Let it sit there, and if it drains that down, then there's something going on with my high pressure oil pump. You know, we're getting a siphon in there somehow. You know, there's some leakage. So anyway, that's my next move on this thing, and just to show you how people like to waste money, we've got all manner of BS on this, like I told you. So this is a Chody or Choate Engineering balanced and blueprinted long block that the customer purchased. We've got well, I guess we'll start. We've got a bypass oil filter on it, and then from Sinister Diesel, and then we also have a bypass coolant filter. We've got this real pretty air intake here, you know, pretty cap on this. We've got a regulated return fuel system on this thing, and I'll explain what that does in a minute for people that don't know. We've got a P-Max turbo. It's got oh, I can't remember the size of the injectors, but it's got bigger, the squirt on the injectors is higher than it is on stock injectors, and why you would need that, I have no idea. We had a brand new front cover, brand new oil pump, so basically everything on this engine was new, and it runs really good. It's a manual transmission, so it has some high fluting clutch in it that I had all kinds of trouble making work, but anyway, got it working. So it'll toss parts out from underneath of it. So, you know, just what you need for a farm truck. So the way this fuel system works, the stock fuel system, the fuel is pulled out of the tank with the pump, pumped up here with the lift pump, and pumped up into your secondary fuel filter housing here. And then there's two feed lines that come off of it, and it feeds both heads, and that fuel comes into the head and it dead ends. So if there's any air that gets past your little air bleed on here, which it can, it's going to go into your head, into your fuel gallery in your head, and the only way for that air to get out of there when they're stock is to go through an injector. So what this does is this adds a line to each head, and you're bringing it, you know, bringing it out of each head into a regulator where you can regulate it, and then back into a block over here, so you can change your fuel pressure here. So if you have any air in your fuel galleries, it's going to come up here and be dumped into the return, so it's not going through an injector. That's the only real thing on this that I kind of believe in. You know, the rest of this is just, I mean, a coolant bypass filter, you know, could take hours or months or days for all of your coolant to go through this filter. Do they help? Yeah, probably a little bit, but flushing, doing a complete flush on your cooling system is, you know, every 2.5 or 3 years is probably way better than, you know, having all these potential leaks going on here. It looks cool, I guess, but anyway, I suppose you know, adding an extra bypass filter on it is not a bad idea. Just don't start it with your oil filler cap off, because you're going to make an oily mess. So anyway, I'm going to check my valves in the bottom of my
unknown caller
filter housing and make sure that, you know, the rubber isn't torn off on the anti-drain back valve, and take a look at the little oil filter drain valve, make sure it's working properly, and you know, if I don't find anything wrong there, then I'm going to do the little test on the high pressure oil reservoir, but I'm pretty convinced that it's the oil pump right now. So as soon as I get that done, I'll come back and tell you what I found. Anyway, thanks. Bye.